Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga. I specialize in teaching yoga teachers how to bring anatomy into their teaching and how to make it both fun and understandable. And I know that you may be hearing this, and if you're a yoga teacher, you may be thinking, make anatomy fun and understandable? How is that possible? I know, anatomy is a complex topic and it's a very broad topic. So I've spent many years trying to determine what the key aspects of anatomy are that are most helpful for teachers to know. And I've pulled together some examples for you so that you can get an appreciation for how learning these key components can really transform your teaching. How can it transform your teaching, you might be asking? Well, it really has to do with not only having a good understanding on your part, but making it understandable for your students. Even though there are many aspects to yoga, one of the biggest aspects is, of course, the movements that we take on the mat. With a lack of understanding of anatomy on the teacher's part, cues can be confusing to students and actually can be incorrect and sometimes even harmful. From the student's point of view, understanding just some key aspects of anatomy can help them move with more safety and steadiness on the mat, not only for their practice today, but for their practice for the long term. But all of that really depends on the teacher having a good understanding of anatomy. So I'm going to give you one example here that brings out some of the key components that I share in my online course and rolls it into an example that's a really common example that we see a lot in practice. So Warrior One is probably one of the most common poses that we do. And as we come into Warrior One, the pretty standard typical position is to bend this front leg, to have the back leg straight, and to reach the arms up in the air. Now you may be looking at that as a yoga teacher, and you may have some of an understanding of what the anatomy involved is. I'm going to share a little more of those details with you. So let's just look at the lower body. When we look at how the lower body is positioned, one hip is in flexion and one hip is in extension. So this front hip here is in flexion. This back hip here is an extension. So right out of the gate, just kind of check yourself and see if you knew the different joint positions with respect to the hips. The next thing is to think about, well, if this hip is an extension, that just by its nature, extending something, means some muscle needs to be lengthening. And so here we're talking about a number of muscles because, of course, nothing really works in isolation in the body. The body is a system and muscles work collaboratively, especially if they're near each other. But let's just talk about one of the primary muscles that's lengthening in Warrior One. And that would be one of the major hip flexors called your psoas. And it runs from your lumbar spine down to your femur, up towards the top here. And when we take Warrior One pose, on the extended leg, on the extended hip, that muscle is lengthening. On the flexed hip, that muscle is contracting or strengthening. And then of course we do it on the other side and get the converse effect. Now, what often happens is this muscle can be tight in people and it can also be weak. If students are sitting a lot during their day and they're not actively contracting the psoas, the muscle can get weak. If they're super athletic or maybe training for a marathon or going to spin class on their off yoga days, that muscle is constantly actively contracting. In either case, if the muscle is tight and or weak, it can limit the level of extensibility available to this hip. But the student may or may not know that, may or may not be getting a lot of feedback from that muscle. But when they come into the posture, they might end up someplace here. And so you'll notice here, not only am I leaning forward, but the position of my pelvis is tipped forward versus having the pelvis level. And this has everything to do, in many cases, not all, with a limit to the range of motion in this hip, in this plane, in this sagittal plane, right? Understanding planes is central to teaching, to understanding anatomy as well. And so if this muscle, let's just talk psoas, is limited in its extensibility, it's going to require, if the student tries to do it in a very long step kind of way, it's going to require they lean forward, and so they're going to be here. So what's a modification you can suggest to a student? Well, you can ask them to step their back foot in. This will decrease the amount of, or the requirement for the psoas to lengthen as much, It'll decrease the amount of extension in this back hip, and it'll allow them to maintain a more upright posture. So here, as we work through this one example, what we needed to depend on as a teacher is an understanding of bones, an understanding of anatomical actions, right? So flexion, extension, an understanding of anatomical planes. So we were talking about this, the sagittal plane. An understanding of muscles. So we're talking about psoas, although there's other muscles too, like the sartorius and the rectus femoris, that are also responsible for hip flexion. And an understanding of whole body systems, at least from a movement or a biomechanical standpoint, which is to say that we needed to understand that if there was some limitation in the extensibility of that back hip, the student is going to be pitched forward, the pelvis is going to be posteriorly tilt versus level. Now, at this point in this video, you may be thinking, oh my God, I'm so confused, I don't know all of that information. How could I possibly bring it into my classes in a clear and understandable, let alone fun way? Well, I've got an offer for you. My offer is to walk you through my online course called Your Yoga Anatomy Blueprint. This is a several module course that breaks down key anatomical information for yoga teachers. It's a wonderful way to supplement the 200-hour training you did, which if you're like many teachers that I talk to, you don't remember or really didn't learn the anatomy portion of that training. And now you're out teaching and you're thinking, there's this lack of knowledge that I have, and what that oftentimes translates to is a lack of confidence in your teaching and a lack of clarity in your cues. I can tell you in my own experience in taking classes many times, I'll hear cues from teachers, let's say when the arms reach up, teachers will say, drop the shoulder blades. That's an incorrect cue, and it works against the anatomy of the scapula and the rhythm that's necessary between the arm bone and the scapula and the clavicle as the shoulder flexes. I'm not going to get into that in detail, but that's just one example of how lack of knowledge of anatomy, along with listening to cues that teachers hear in other classes and just assume that they're correct, results in the transfer of incorrect information to students. So if you're interested in building your anatomy knowledge, in increasing your confidence, in increasing the clarity and correctness of your cues, all which will have a positive impact on your students and help them feel more empowered and more steady and strong on the mat, I want you to click the link attached to this video, which will give you access in a time-limited way to view the modules included, as well as $500 of free bonuses to increase your learning of this subject. So all you need to do is click the link. That'll take you to the web page. You'll see all of what's covered in the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint course. You'll see all of the learning tools that are part of the $500 worth of free bonuses. And all together, that comprehensive package will increase your knowledge of anatomy and really help you increase your confidence and your impact on your students. And that's really what we want. We want to make an impact in a positive way on our students' health, not only when they're in our classes, but when they're off the mat as well, walking around, picking up heavy boxes, getting in and out of the car, doing, going to the gym, going running, doing all those things that involve movement. We want them to move smarter. But to do that, we have to have the knowledge so we can impart it to them. If you have any questions, you can always go to my website, barebonesyoga.com, and you can click the Contact Me page and send me an email. Otherwise, I'm going to include the link to the Blueprint course. I encourage you to look at it. Keep in mind, once you click the link, you only have 48 hours to make a purchase decision. Thank you so much for watching, and namaste.